Imagine this. You're standing in a crowded subway car, shoulders brushing strangers, the air thick with the hum of conversations and the glow of smartphone screens. Everyone is connected, tapping, scrolling, laughing at memes, but you feel a hollow ache in your chest, as if you're watching the world through a pane of glass. You're surrounded by humanity, yet utterly alone. This is the paradox of modern loneliness. The more connected we become technologically, the more alienated we feel spiritually. What if loneliness isn't a flaw to fix, but a mirror to confront? What if the emptiness you feel isn't a void to fill, but a compass pointing towards something deeper? We've been taught to fear loneliness, to medicate it with noise, distractions, and superficial bonds. But what if it's trying to tell you something? Consider the man who spends hours crafting a witty social media post, craving validation, only to delete it moments later, paralyzed by the thought, does anyone really care? Or the woman who attends networking events, collecting contacts like trophies, yet lies awake at night wondering, why do I feel invisible? These are not personal failures. They're symptoms of a collective delusion. We've conflated being alone with being unworthy. But loneliness is not a verdict on your likability. It's a primal scream from the soul, a signal that something essential is missing. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "The thought of suicide is a powerful solace. It helps one endure life." Dark as it sounds, he was pointing to a truth we've sanitized. Loneliness, when unexamined, becomes a slow-acting poison. It warps our perception of reality, convincing us that isolation is our natural state. But what if the opposite is true? What if the human soul is designed to need others, not in the transactional way of likes and followers, but in the raw, messy exchange of vulnerability? Think of the last time you felt truly understood, not agreed with, not admired, but seen. That moment when someone's gaze cut through your facade and recognized the chaos beneath. Now contrast it with the numbness of modern interaction, the curated profiles, the performative small talk, the fear of saying the wrong thing. We've built a world that rewards perfection and punishes authenticity. No wonder loneliness festers. It's the price we pay for trading connection for convenience. But here's the unsettling question. What if loneliness isn't just a side effect of modern life, but a catalyst for transformation? The mystic Thomas Merton wrote, "We are all prisoners of a false self, and loneliness is the cell that holds us. Yet within that cell, we're forced to confront the parts of ourselves we've buried, the shame, the longing, the unspoken dreams. Loneliness strips away the illusions we cling to, leaving only the raw material of who we are. Picture the artist who paints their masterpiece only after years of solitary struggle, or the addict who hits rock bottom and finally confronts their shadow. These are not stories of despair, but of rebirth. Loneliness, when embraced, becomes a crucible. It forces us to ask, who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly want? But most of us resist this confrontation. We numb the pain with endless scrolling, binge-watching, or chasing dopamine hits. We mistake temporary relief for healing. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer called this the pendulum of existence, swinging between boredom and pain, never stopping long enough to question the machinery of our lives. Yet, here's the paradox. The more you resist loneliness, the tighter its grip. The more you chase connection, the more elusive it becomes. You're trapped in a loop, haunted by the question, why can't I just be happy? But what if happiness isn't the goal? What if loneliness is not the problem, but the first step toward a deeper truth? You might be thinking, this is too abstract. Give me solutions. But what if the solution lies not in escaping loneliness, but in understanding its language? What if the key to connection is first sitting with disconnection? Consider the words of Carl Jung. Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. This is the great question we must face. What parts of yourself have you silenced in the quest to belong? And what would happen if you let them speak? The journey ahead will take you into the shadowed corners of the psyche, where loneliness is both the wound and the scalpel. You'll confront uncomfortable truths about society's role in your isolation, the myths you've been fed about success, and the radical act of reclaiming your voice. But first, you must ask yourself, am I ready to stop running? The answer begins in the next section, not with a remedy, but with a reckoning. The loneliness you feel isn't your fault. It's a symptom of a world that has forgotten how to be human. Let's rewind 200 years. Before the rise of industrialization, humans lived in tight-knit communities where roles were defined, rituals were shared, and survival depended on interdependence. Loneliness, as we know it, barely existed. Not because people were happier, but because isolation was a practical impossibility. Today we've traded villages for cities, clans for curated friend groups, and meaning for productivity. We're more connected than ever, yet a 2023 study found that 61% of adults feel chronically disconnected from others. What changed? The answer lies in a silent revolution: the rise of hyper-individualism. Capitalism taught us to see ourselves as competitors, not collaborators. Social media turned identity into a performance, and self-help culture weaponized the myth of independence, framing reliance on others as weakness. We've become spiritual orphans, severed from the traditions, rituals, and collective narratives that once anchored us. But here's the deeper cut. Loneliness isn't just a social phenomenon, it's a psychological exile. Carl Jung argued that the modern psyche is fractured, split between the persona, the mask we show the world, and the shadow, the parts we reject. The more we disown our shadows, our anger, shame, envy, the more we feel fragmented, unworthy of genuine connection. We project our disowned selves onto others, judging them for the flaws we refuse to confront. The result? A world of strangers, all hiding, all judging, all starving for authenticity. Nietzsche saw this coming. He warned that the herd morality of mass culture would strip individuals of their uniqueness, reducing them to docile bodies chasing validation. When you base your worth on likes, followers, or professional accolades, you surrender your sovereignty. You become a character in someone else's story, a puppet of algorithms and societal expectations. No wonder you feel empty. You're not you anymore. But the crisis runs deeper still. Existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre claimed humans are condemned to freedom, burdened by the weight of infinite choices. In a world without inherent meaning, we're forced to invent our own, a terrifying task. Most people default to societal scripts, career, marriage, home ownership, to avoid the vertigo of freedom. Yet this avoidance breeds existential loneliness. You're trapped in a life that doesn't feel like yours, surrounded by people who don't see you, wondering, is this all there is? Schopenhauer took this further. He believed human existence is driven by a relentless will to live, a force that dooms us to perpetual desire. We chase love, wealth, status, only to find emptiness on the other side. Loneliness, in this view, isn't a bug, but a feature. It's the friction between our infinite cravings and finite reality. Every time you scroll through Instagram, comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel, you're feeling Schopenhauer's trap. The illusion that fulfillment is always just out of reach. Even our biology conspires against us. Humans evolved to thrive in tribes. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, isn't just for romance. It's a survival mechanism. When we lack meaningful touch, eye contact, or deep conversation, our nervous systems revolt. Chronic loneliness triggers the same stress response as physical pain. It's no coincidence that the loneliest demographics, teens, the elderly, remote workers, suffer higher rates of depression, addiction, and autoimmune disorders. We're quite literally dying from disconnection, and yet society gaslights us. It tells the lonely to put themselves out there, as if connection is a numbers game. It pathologizes solitude, equating it with failure. But the real sickness is the system that profits from our isolation. Aldous Huxley predicted this in Brave New World, a dystopia where people are pacified by pleasure, distracted by triviality, and conditioned to fear authentic feeling. Sound familiar? We're drowning in Huxley's vision, a world where loneliness is both the product and the punishment of modernity. The greatest irony? The tools meant to connect us are deepening the divide. Social media offers a counterfeit intimacy, a dopamine-driven simulation of belonging. You can talk to hundreds of people a day without risking a single vulnerable thought. You curate your life into a highlight reel, then wonder why no one knows the real you. It's a feedback loop. The more you perform, the lonelier you feel. The lonelier you feel, the more you perform. This is the hidden problem. Loneliness isn't a personal failing, but a systemic erasure. It's the cost of living in a world that values efficiency over empathy, productivity over presence, personas over people. And until you confront this, your attempts to fix loneliness will fail. You can't heal in the same system that made you sick. You think you're escaping loneliness by filling your life with noise, but you're actually feeding a monster. Every time you scroll instead of speak, perform instead of confess, or consume instead of create, you reinforce a neural pathway that equates connection with transaction. Your brain, desperate for relief, starts treating relationships like a slot machine. Pull the lever of a text message, a swipe, a smile, and maybe you'll hit the jackpot of validation. But the more you gamble, the less you win. This isn't just about you. Loneliness is a silent pandemic, reshaping society from the inside out. Consider the rise of deaths of despair, suicides, opioid overdoses, alcohol-related liver disease, now claiming over 150,000 lives annually in the US alone. These aren't random tragedies. They're the logical endpoint of a culture that treats humans like cogs in a machine, then medicates their pain with pills and platitudes. Gabor Mate, the physician who studied addiction for decades, argues that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. But when connection itself is commodified, addiction becomes inevitable. Even our politics are infected. Have you noticed how anger and polarization thrive in the age of loneliness? Social media algorithms, designed to exploit your insecurities, funnel you into echo chambers where your worst fears about the world are confirmed. The lonelier you feel, the more susceptible you are to tribalism. You cling to ideologies that offer a fleeting sense of belonging, even if it means dehumanizing others. The result? A society where neighbors become enemies, and dialogue becomes war. But the most insidious consequence is what loneliness does to your perception of reality. Neurologically, chronic loneliness alters the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for empathy and decision-making. You become hypervigilant, misreading neutral interactions as threats. A friend's delayed text response morphs into a personal rejection. A colleague's offhand comment feels like a calculated attack. Over time, this rewires your worldview. You see hostility where there is none, and you retreat further, convinced the world is a cold and dangerous place. Cultural conditioning amplifies this distortion. Capitalism thrives on your sense of lack. Advertisements sell you solutions to loneliness, luxury apartments, luxury cars, luxury lifestyles, as if isolation can be cured by purchasing power. Even self-help gurus profit from your despair, peddling productivity hacks and manifestation rituals that reinforce the myth of individualism. You're told to love yourself as if it's a switch to flip, ignoring the fact that self-love is born in the reflection of another's gaze. And what about the spiritual cost? The poet T.S. Eliot warned of a world distracted from distraction by distraction, where humans are filled with fancies, yet empty of meaning. He foresaw our era, a culture drowning in superficiality, starving for transcendence. We've replaced sacred rituals with retail therapy, meditation apps, and gym obsessions. Secular sacraments that promise peace but deliver only temporary anesthesia. The soul withers, and we mistake the symptoms, restlessness, emptiness, fear, for personal flaws rather than spiritual emergencies. Here's the darkest truth. Loneliness doesn't just happen to you. It's engineered. The philosopher Herbert Marcuse argued that modern society is a one-dimensional machine designed to suppress dissent by keeping people docile and disconnected. When you're isolated, you're easier to control. You're less likely to question why healthcare is a privilege, why inequality is rampant, or why your worth is measured in output. Loneliness isn't a bug. It's a feature of systems that thrive on your powerlessness. But there's a catch. The more you internalize these lies, the more you become complicit in your own imprisonment. Every time you choose a Netflix binge over a difficult conversation, a dopamine hit over a heartfelt apology, or a fantasy of someday over the risk of authenticity, you reinforce the walls of your cell. You're not just a victim, you're a volunteer. Yet, what if this is the universe's cruel joke? What if the very systems that isolate us contain the seeds of their own destruction? Consider the paradox. The lonelier we become, the more desperate we are for real connection. The more desperate we are, the more likely we are to finally stop running. In the next section, we'll explore how to turn this desperation into power, a rebellion against the forces that seek to keep you small. But first, you must confront the most uncomfortable question of all. What are you willing to sacrifice to be free? The answer will require burning the script you've been handed. To break free, you must first commit heresy. Stop trying to fix your loneliness. This is the rebellion, not against the world, but against the story you've been told. That loneliness is a disease, that connection is a numbers game, that you're broken until you find your people. The truth is, you already are your people. The you that hides in the shower, screaming lyrics to songs no one else hears. The you that cries at sunsets and rages at injustice. The you that society taught you to bury. That's the version worth liberating. The first act of rebellion: embrace the shadow. Carl Jung warned that the shadow, the parts of yourself you deem unacceptable, is the source of both your pain and your power. Every time you suppress anger, shame, or envy, you fragment your psyche. You become a stranger to yourself. But when you turn toward the shadow, you reclaim those exiled pieces. Journal your darkest thoughts. Confess your ugliest insecurities to a trusted friend. Dance wildly in your living room. The more you integrate the shadow, the less you'll project your disowned self onto others. Connection begins when you stop hiding. Next, redefine what connection means. Society sells you a transactional lie. Relationships are about mutual benefit, networking, or entertainment. Burn that script. True connection is alchemy. It happens when two people drop their masks and say, "I am scared, flawed, and alive. Do you dare to meet me here?" Start small. Ask a coworker, "What's something you've never told anyone?" Tell your sibling what you've always resented about them. Vulnerability is contagious. The more you risk, the more others will follow. But rebellion requires more than introspection. It demands sacred friction. Nietzsche wrote, "You must be a chaos to give birth to a dancing star." Lean into the discomfort that loneliness brings. Sit in a crowded park and feel the paradox of being alone yet surrounded. Attend a funeral, protest, or a poetry slam, places where raw humanity is unavoidable. Let the ache of disconnection remind you what's at stake. As the Stoics taught, pain is the price of consciousness. To numb it is to reject your birthright as a feeling being. To sustain this rebellion, build micro-communities of meaning. The poet John Donne wrote, "No man is an island, but modern life has turned us into archipelagos, isolated landmasses pretending to be whole. Reject this. Start a weekly potluck where everyone shares a failure. Host a shadow circle where participants confess their deepest shame. Create art, music, or writing that dares to be imperfect. These aren't social obligations, they're acts of resistance. They prove that connection doesn't require perfection, just courage. And finally, reclaim your existential sovereignty. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that freedom is the ultimate act of rebellion. Stop outsourcing your meaning to algorithms, corporations, or cultural scripts. Ask yourself, if no one were watching, what would I create? Who would I love? What would I fight for? Let your answers guide you, even if they terrify you. The loneliest people are those who've surrendered their agency. The bravest are those who build lives that feel unapologetically theirs. This isn't easy. The system will punish you for rebelling. Friends might call you intense. Algorithms will try to lure you back with dopamine hits. But remember, every time you choose authenticity over approval, you chip away at the machinery of isolation. You become a beacon for others trapped in the same prison. In the final section, we'll confront the ultimate paradox, that loneliness isn't the enemy, but the teacher. The journey doesn't end with connection. It ends with a revelation so profound, it will redefine everything you thought you knew about being human. Are you ready to meet your soul? You've been lied to. Loneliness isn't a curse, it's an initiation. The final truth is this: you are never truly alone. Not because the world is filled with people, but because the boundary between you and everything else is an illusion. The existential void you feared, the one you've tried to fill with lovers, achievements, and distractions, is not a flaw. It's a portal. The mystics understood this. Rumi wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." Loneliness is the scream of the soul realizing its own infinity. When you strip away the roles, the masks, the stories, what's left isn't emptiness. It's the raw, unfiltered essence of being. You are a convergence of stardust, consciousness, and chaos. Your loneliness isn't a sign of disconnection. It's proof of your vastness. This is the paradox Nietzsche hinted at when he wrote, "Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Superman, a rope over an abyss." Loneliness is the abyss. It's the space between who you think you are and who you could become. Most people cling to the rope of identity, jobs, relationships, beliefs, to avoid the vertigo of that space. But the rebels, the artists, the truth seekers, they leap into the abyss, trusting it will teach them to fly. Consider Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps by realizing that even in hell, humans possess the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. His loneliness became a crucible for meaning. Or the poet Mary Oliver, who wrote, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Her question is a mirror. The loneliness you feel isn't a barrier to living fully. It's the price of admission. But here's the kicker. When you stop running from loneliness, you stop needing other people to complete you. This is the secret Aldous Huxley glimpsed in The Perennial Philosophy. True connection isn't merger, but resonance. Two souls vibrating at the same frequency, each whole yet harmonizing. Think of a mother and child, a lover's gaze, a friend's laughter in the dark. These moments aren't about erasing loneliness, but sanctifying it. They're reminders that we're all broken open by the same existential questions. The ultimate rebellion, then, is to sanctify your solitude. Turn off the noise. Sit with the parts of yourself you've been taught to hate. Let the loneliness carve you like a river carves stone. Over time, you'll notice something strange. The more comfortable you become with solitude, the less you crave validation. You'll start seeing others not as mirrors to reflect your worth, but as fellow travelers sharing the same terrifying, beautiful journey. This is the final twist. Loneliness isn't the enemy, it's the teacher. It strips you of illusions until you're left with the raw material of existence. I am, I feel, I matter. The Buddhists call this tathata, the suchness of reality. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger called it Dasein, being there. Strip away the layers and you're left with a simple truth. You are here, now, alive. Everything else is decoration. But here's the catch. You can't intellectualize this truth. You must live it. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, you align with the cosmic joke that we're all lonely, all afraid, all pretending we're not. When you laugh at the absurdity, you join the ranks of the philosophers, poets, and prophets who've stared into the void and whispered, "I see you." So what now? You return to the world, but not as a victim, as a warrior. You engage in conversations not to perform, but to witness. You create art not to impress, but to exercise. You love not to possess, but to participate. And when loneliness returns, as it will, you greet it like an old teacher. What do you have to show me this time? The screen fades, the music swells. You're left with a question that will haunt you for the rest of your life. If you're already whole, why are you still hiding? The answer is the work of a lifetime. Go find it.